Vamos a dar ya paso a la primera sesión del Ágora, que se llama, atención, Descubrir la fiebre del oro de la EdTech. Suena bien, ¿verdad? Bueno, pues va a estar mejor porque vamos a explorar oportunidades, tendencias y estrategias de inversiones exitosas en el panorama educativo global en relación con la tecnología. Nuestra moderadora es Liz Fleming, Chief Ecosystem Officer de South Summit, así que un fuerte aplauso para ella. Gracias, Liz.
Come, let's go, guys, let's go. Ben, Marie-Christine, Sonia. These are, of course, the superstars that we have with us this morning. Please grab a seat, guys. You have a little water there if you need it. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for making it all the way to the 4th floor. This building is beautiful and sometimes tricky to navigate, so we're so delighted to Fundación Telefónica, our hosts, for having us here today in this amazing space. And we didn't want Enlighted to go by without taking this opportunity to dive deep into the investment opportunities related to technology and education. Education is such a vast industry. It's really exciting to see that there's actually so many specialized opportunities for how technology is impacting the sector. And in particular, at this edition of Enlighted, we're diving deep into rethinking education through AI and what that looks like, how that might work. We've already gone through some of the fears and the opportunities downstairs with Toju. But from a business perspective, I'd love to take this opportunity to get a little close up and comfy with you guys to see the types of opportunities you're investing in, the trends you're seeing in the market. For any entrepreneurs, students here thinking about career trajectories, new opportunities, just looking at some of the trends and the market gaps out there today, that might be huge opportunities for this audience in the future. So before I dive straight in with my first question, because that's like everything all in one go, quick intro to Sonia as a partner at Kivo Ventures here in Madrid, but one of the first and one of the leading VCs out of Spain, but investing right across Europe and even in the US as well, I believe. Marie-Christine, who's in from Edu Capital, I believe the first verticalized edtech fund launched out of Paris. Marie-Christine has extensive experience as a technology entrepreneur herself, so has seen both sides of the tables. And my good friend Ben, who's actually no classmate of mine. Education brings us all together, right? It's all about the relationships you build. And Ben is a founding partner at Bright Eye Venture Capital, based out of Paris and London, and also specializing in the EdTech vertical. So folks, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And for making the trip to this edition of Enlighted. Straight to the core of it. What is happening in AI and education? What is the opportunity, and what are you guys as an investor most maybe, concerned or excited about in terms of market opportunity there?
I can take it. So AI for me is a big revolution in education. So first there's, with AI, what you can do is adaptive learning. That means you can really use a lot of data to give personalized path to students. And that happens, from like K-12 up to lifelong learning. So, and it's like really, what the private tutoring was doing. If a private tutor has two students, he gives different exercise to one or the other children, and with AI you can do that in big classrooms. So AI and adaptive learning is one of the biggest trends, and now there's a big revolution, which is generative AI. So we see a lot of companies, that want to build, companies upon OpenAI, upon ChatGPT, and that can offer a lot of services. There will be a lot of companies building, a foreign tool for teachers, how to use, generative AI to build, quiz, exercise. You have also another path, which is how to use generative AI to correct copies. So generative AI is a whole revolution, and there's one thing which is very interesting. It's tutoring, generative AI tutor. I've seen, impressive companies, in language learning, and you learn language with an AI tutor. And it's quite impressive because you can go very, very fast. So I think that for students here in the room, Gen AI, offers a lot of opportunities. It's a big revolution. For me, it's a revolution as big as the search, engine was back in 2000.
Awesome. Excellent.
So when I think about generative AI, I think I kind of break it down in terms of what people are actually doing with it in education today. And I'm going to skip the other AI stuff because that's been around for a while. But if you just focus on generative, I think there's a lot of press around the fact that students are using it to do their homework, right? And I think what generative AI is certainly good at is producing content. So, poll by Quizlet, which is an American ed tech company, showed that 60% of students were actively using some kind of generative AI ostensibly for learning, but in part, certainly for producing content, right? And you can do that in a productive format. You can do that in a totally unproductive format where you just ask the robot to do your work for you. It's unclear. I think the more interesting statistic is honestly that more teachers than students are using it. So 2/3 of teachers are actually using it to produce content. And so I don't know how many students are out here in the audience right now. It looks like they're all downstairs. But if you think you're bored because you have to do one assignment on a particular day and you're going to use a robot to do it, and that's your solution, just imagine how bored the teacher is who has to teach that same lesson every year to students. And so actually having some accompaniment with the more rote task of content generation, of creating lessons for teachers is quite exciting. But honestly, I think for both of those instances, the impact on actual learning is pretty marginal, right? Like, teachers can create more content. Ultimately, publishers can create more content. That content can become more dynamic. As Marie-Christine mentioned, it can be more personalized because it's just a lot easier to create content. But ultimately, the experiments that have been built around personalized learning have been disappointing, right? So Chan Zuckerberg, which is Mark Zuckerberg's foundation, just announced that they were actually basically canning their entire personalized learning projects that they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on, because the impact of that is fairly marginal. And the reason it's fairly marginal is what personalized learning assumes is that people actually are self-motivated learners, that most people who are learning in a situation just enjoy the process of learning. And the honest truth of that is that most people don't. Learning sucks. Learning is basically about making mistakes over and over again, and nobody likes that feeling, right? Or at least very few people like that feeling. And the role of teachers, right, in a generative AI context is in that context, is really motivation, right? So I think the holy grail of generative AI, which we haven't yet seen, is we have seen really good examples of providing feedback, and I think that's really interesting. That provides motivated learners who have less means the ability to get feedback, right? You can't afford a tutor, but you can certainly afford an automated feedback. But again, that assumes you have the motivation. The thing we haven't yet seen is AI that actually motivates, right? Like is like a generative AI that comes in and provides the motivation to show up in the first place. And ultimately, that's the holy grail. That's what we would be super excited about. If anybody's building that, please come talk to me. But like,
get people to
we
learn.
haven't seen that yet. Anyway, sorry, that's my spiel.
Awesome, thank you.
I think
Sonia?
just to add, one of the things that we're seeing is that whatever technology or company that aims to get into the classroom, I think the teachers need to really see that as a useful tool. So we invested in a company called InnovaMath based in Barcelona, and they do pure maths for K-12, so in the curriculum. And really, just getting the teachers involved and getting them to really, embrace the system and to see it as a way to make their life easier and to be better at what they do. Is incredibly, without that, it's very difficult that technology gets implemented. So somehow, I think with generative AI, teachers are going to have to see, how will this help me in terms of getting my students to learn better. And that's going to be a challenge in many ways because they will need to be on top of what the students are doing and finding ways to get them more engaged, as you were saying. Which is, at the end of the day, an engaged student is a student that's going to learn. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. So
Sure, understood. And I guess you touched a little bit there on kind of business model into this industry, which is something that, as a recovered venture capitalist, that I would have always been very conscious and aware of. It's such a challenging industry to sell into, let's say. Not so much regulated, but huge public institutions and a lot of different players and a complicated ecosystem to navigate, let's say. Whereas with this kind of generative AI stuff, it's amazing the leap forward into basically B2C. And I love that it seems that in education it can be adopted almost seamlessly or friction-free to some extent, because low risk and reward, as opposed to maybe in a corporate environment, I need a policy, we need a test sandbox, whereas teachers and students are grabbing this and giving it a go until they're told otherwise, and I think that's amazing. Slight sidestep from the technology focus, and we get right back to that. Does the advancement in technology matter related to kind of what you're saying in the personal tutoring space? If the context doesn't change, because maybe this is something to what you're alluding about the motivation. I mean, if the context of, classroom, 8 hours a day, 4 walls, lines of tables, instructor at the top, if the context that they're learning in maybe doesn't change, are these technological revolutions irrelevant? Or maybe on the personal tutor context, is it going to be more and more about selling into the homes, selling into the direct users, selling to the parents to get to the kids? What's your perspective on that in terms of marrying the system and the technology, I guess?
In fact, in terms of higher ed and lifelong learning, I think the context has changed a lot. The diploma that you might have, that you have one diploma in your whole life is finished. You will have to have your diploma, but then you will have to get a lot of micro certification. And really people in the adult age, they really train themselves, to get this certification in order to increase their employability. So I think we've seen a lot of new models that are disrupting, traditional education, traditional higher ed. It could be boot camps, it could be career accelerators. We invest in a company in Germany called Tomorrow University. It's completely online, bachelor and master degrees. So this is really happening in the lifelong learning area. There's also a lot of people that needs upskilling. There's a huge opportunity for to upskill. There are a lot of labor parts in the labor market that we need people. There are not enough people trained, and these people can be really trained online. So I think this lifelong learning, higher ed is disrupted. It's true that for the K-12, this is the most difficult because it often depends on political decisions and political ambitions.
Yeah, I mean, what I hope, right, for the generative AI, or the impact of generative AI and to a larger degree technology more generally has on learning is not, I mean, honestly, the single biggest impact it could have is not the interaction with the technology, but the idea that the recognition in learning, from K-12 through adulthood, that active learning is actually just a much more efficient way to learn than passive learning, right? So this format that we're doing right now is terrible, right? Like you guys, I mean, there's 4 people talking, right? And you guys are all listening, and after 30 minutes, I will mention a statistic at the beginning of this talk, and the chance that you guys will remember it is maybe 10%, right? Maybe 10%. You'll
so
remember,
you're going to say it 3 times.
yeah, exactly. I can repeat it enough, and maybe if we're super dynamic or like the television presenters before, maybe like 15, 20%, right? Because they're like much better than we are at projecting. But generally speaking, this is a terrible format, right? And so this has been true forever, right? And actually, since the internet has been around, knowledge has been broadly available. The challenge is just that we haven't changed the way that we learn. I agree with Marie-Christine that has changed. To the extent it's changed largely in the workplace, in lifelong learning, but it really hasn't changed at all in K-12, and honestly, marginally in universities, right? I.e. maybe being the exception, I don't know. So if the impact of Gen AI is to say, well, now that you can't ignore the fact that everybody has access to instruction and a personal instructor that's relatively informed, then maybe we can actually make better use of the coaching, mentoring, inspiration time that happens between people, which honestly AI sucks at the moment. And so anyway, that's what I hope. Yeah.
And I really believe in blended learning. We'll have more and more blended learning. The one-to-many classroom can be done, by yourself with a very good teacher at your home. But when you go to class, it's a lot of peer-to-peer learning. I think peer-to-peer learning will be a big, a big trend. That really people working together like you work in the real life. And I think that university will have more and more to teach students that.
But it's true that I don't think there's been a lot of change in terms of universities and the kids who have the good grades, they all want to go to the same schools, and that hasn't really changed. It's not that the brightest kids want to try necessarily different models. So I think it also comes down to what the job market will then value. And I think to some extent that is changing a little bit in the US. I don't know, Ben, you may have a better perspective that maybe, the degree from, the Ivy League school is not, maybe as relevant if you show that you've done all of this, qualifications and you're a hustler and you've done a lot of things. But still, it's kind of, that hasn't really moved. So most of the traditional ways are still the same because the job market is still valuing that versus something else, which...
Yeah, I think just to, we're all sort of obligated to promote our portfolio, so apologies in advance. But there is a company that we're invested in called Hack the Box, right? And so their big insight was actually that hackers, if you're a really good hacker, what you actually like to do is try to break into stuff. Regardless of whether you're doing that for good purposes or bad purposes, all you really want to do is get more and more challenging systems to break into, right? And so they built a system that just allowed hackers to challenge one another to break into like more and more complicated systems, and initially was just dedicated to essentially prosumers, like professional consumers. And then what they realized is that companies, the hackers all worked at companies, and those companies were interested in, training the people who weren't, part of this community to get the skills that the community had. And so they built an enterprise platform on top of that. And then the companies inevitably said, also, we don't have enough of these experts inside of our platform, and so can we use your platform to identify the next recruit, the people who don't, so there's just a super vibrant community of people that have nothing to do with traditional, degrees, right? It's just like, what is the level inside of Hack the Box that you have achieved, and does that match with what we're looking for inside of, and those guys have done super well and are now, globally a leader in the space. So I think, the point is, for technical disciplines, I think, the horse has left the barn or whatever the expression is.
Left the stable,
but like, but I think for more for other disciplines, it's still lagging basically.
Yeah, and I guess it reflects a little bit the dynamic of the market, which you alluded to earlier. That some areas are kind of really complex, it seems to sell into, and some are much more dynamic. Let's say for entrepreneurs with new technologies and opportunities. I am giving a heads up to all of you guys, and mostly to my team in the back, to get a microphone ready to instantly react to Ben's comment and make this an interactive session. So please get your questions ready, and I'll give you an opportunity to get in on the conversation immediately. And just to prep everybody, before I go there, back to business models, because there is huge innovation in context of education in certain areas, like the technical skills, like the lifelong learning, let's say. So what are some of this, for any entrepreneurs, again, thinking about building solutions and approaching this market, what are some of the successful business models that you have seen in terms of capturing market share in this space?
I talk too much. I'm waiting.
So basically, in terms of lifelong learning, it's mainly selling to individuals. So like it's B2C traditional model. Then you have a lot of upskilling in organization. So this is selling to corporation. There's really corporation needs to upskill their employees. There will be a lot of jobs that will disappear, new jobs that will be created. So they use emergency in corporation to really manage the corporation by skills. It's skills based on organization, and then they have budget to upskill. And then in terms of K-12, there are like two ways. Either you sell to to schools or regions or districts, and it can be long process, but there are budgets. Otherwise, there are like quite clever companies that also have been going through the teachers and having massive usage from the teachers, and then teachers upscale to their organization. And in terms of K-12 B2C, I believe in companies having a lot of usage, and then the freemium models. Like we are invested in a company called KnowUnity in Germany. It's a social network for students, for K-12 students, so age from 10 to 17, where really it's a sort of TikTok for education. They share classes. You can follow other students, and this is totally freemium model. So they have huge user base, and then they can sell tutoring, they can sell other things. So the freemium model is an interesting model.
For us, we tend to like B2B models more than B2C. Just we, in general, view them as less risky in terms of cost of acquisition. And we see both models as Marie-Christine was saying, in EdTech. I think it's, in the end, it's B2B2C, because ultimately there'll be, even if you if you have, we're investors in Odilo, which is a company based in Spain, and they do a lot of corporate learning. So they sell to the corporates, but in the end, the product will be consumed by you if you work at Telefónica and you happen to have the Odilo platform. But those models are more predictable in terms of revenue generation, and for us as funds, we feel we can maybe address the risk in a better way. But, there are successful B2C business models as well in EdTech, so you see both.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is marketplaces are super interesting, I think, in the EdTech context, because broadly speaking, one of the biggest challenges is just reducing cost in education, and marketplaces are really good at reducing costs, whether it's we're investors in a company called Ornicar, which is essentially Uber for driving instructors in France, and those guys have managed to reduce the cost by 40%. And honestly, the entire market has changed because of the fact that they launched this product and everybody else had to react. And so it's super efficient on that. And then also labor marketplaces, so placement of talent, and especially when you marry that with training is a really powerful model, and so we're interested in those.
It's so vast, really, when you start to kind of scratch under the surface and see how broad the market opportunity is. Folks, this is your chance. I may or may not have a microphone, but I can repeat your question if we have any burning questions, queries, issues for our very experienced speakers here. Anything at all? That's fine. You can jump up and down and catch me a little further on. We have a couple of minutes left, so I'll drive on regardless. Back to the motivation of learning. What happened to gamification? Wasn't that supposed to solve that?
Yeah. I think, again, the challenge if you think about the biggest opportunity in education, right, is increasing the amount of time you spend learning, right? Like, that's it. And so the gamification, if you look at, like, honestly, the most valuable public edtech company, I think, in the world at this point is Duolingo. And they, so it works, right? Like, at scale, it works. They've done really, really well with that. But it's clearly not, optimal for, I would say, skill creation. It's really optimal for knowledge. Like if you've already decided that you want to increase your vocabulary, I think it's really good for keeping you committed to this goal that you already have. But it's not clear you could build Duolingo for, like, welding, right? Like, how do you do that? Or even Duolingo for physics, right? Like, it's maybe a bit too complicated. So I think. That's why I think actually the promise of generative AI is really maybe aligning on the motivation side. And short of that, honestly, I think the switch from humans as imparters of knowledge to humans as motivators is really kind of, if you look at the current wave of interesting companies, whether it's KnowUnity, which is like students teaching students, Hack the Box, which is like hackers teaching hackers, or at least competing with hackers, or even GoStudent, which is like a massive tutoring platform, which is among the most valuable edtech companies in Europe. It's really about harnessing that motivation. I think works better, or at least is more broadly applicable than gamification, which seems kind of narrow. At least that's what we've seen.
Yeah, and for, like, science and or every learning that you need to manipulate, I think that immersive learning and virtual reality is very interesting. We've been investing in Labster, which is a Danish company that provides virtual laboratories to teach science, because when you learn science, it's often very dull and very boring. And then if you manipulate, you really memorize much better. So I think that with the fact that a lot of the handset the price will go down, virtual reality will be is an interesting subject to motivate learners.
I think one of the trends that we need to face is that we compete for the attention of, the K-12 spectrum. So if you all have kids, you know how I was attending a conference the other day from Gerard Piqué, who leads Cosmos, and they have designed this Kings League, which is soccer in a different way. And he was saying, like, his own kids have trouble really sitting through a 90-minute football game, father being, a great soccer player. So it's just very, getting that attention. I don't know if the gaming factor could be a way, but it's just very, very, very difficult. And we're competing against, you know, social media, we're competing against a lot of...
Yeah, it's true. Again,
yeah.
it's such a broad sector, and then you have to think about your user, whether it's your client or your user, and the other responsibilities they have in their day, you know what I mean, through leisure and entertainment and everything else. So it's phenomenal. I love that you mentioned Kings League. I'd throw it into kind of sports tech section, but yeah, in terms of engagement and creating new formats, you know, I think it's mind-blowing. So if you haven't come across that, check it out, and it's a total revolution. That's the gamification of, you know, football at some level, is what we're seeing as an interesting example. So, you know, maybe we see that in the classroom, you know, kids league, you know, where it's like competitive classrooms with presidents and captains and coaches, you know, and they're competing against each other and engaged in the process. So I suppose engagement, the enriching the person-to-person and peer learning and the face-to-face. And I love that immersive idea about really kind of getting your hands on the learning, for want of a better word, to kind of increase that motivation. Really looks like some of the good opportunities that we can, you know, think more creatively maybe about the technology, and certainly not consider the device in, you know, in people's hands, because I think people are trying to escape from that, particularly in the K-12 section. But huge, enormous opportunities out there, and I'm excited about the companies that you guys are invested in. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. Folks, big round of applause, please.
Congratulations.